The Drake Corsair is a solid bounty hunting ship. Oh wait, what? Oh, okay. The Drake Corsair is the premier exploration ship manufactured by Drake Interplanetary. It's been specifically outfitted to excel in this role with luxurious interior crew quarters, a full scanning suite located safe from harm, a rear ramp for cargo and exploration vehicles, and 6 large weapon hardpoints, giving the ship the highest pilot-controlled DPS currently in the game, at least on paper. And that's obviously necessary for exploring some of those tougher exploration sites. And if you want to explore something small or quick, the Corsair also has 4 size 4 missile hardpoints. So with all of this explore power, you'd really expect it to excel at exploration missions like VHRTs and ERTs, right? Let's get into it. I'm going to start this off by saying the performance of this ship leaves me torn. Anyone that says this ship is incredible because of its incredibly high DPS, or anyone that says it's terrible because of its sluggish speed or fragile thrusters is oversimplifying. These things are true, but the final package of everything put together depends a lot on what you're fighting, what your loadout is, and how the servers are performing. And the impact of server performance is not that simple. A faster server means you're less likely to have desync, so it'll be easier to land your shots, and that your decoys will be much more successful at flaring off incoming missiles, which are both good things. But it also means that the enemies will converge on you much quicker, they'll stay more tightly grouped up, and they'll hit a lot more of their shots, which will put a lot more pressure on your shields. Because of all of these factors, there isn't a great one-size-fits-all rating for the ship's bounty exploration capabilities. So I'm going to go through the ship's strengths and weaknesses with different loadouts in different situations so that you can decide for yourself whether or not this might be the ship for your exploration needs. So first things first, let's establish a baseline of the ship's capabilities. Its greatest strength is its 6 large weapon hardpoints, with a staggering 4 size 5 hardpoints on the nose and 2 more size 4s on the wings. These are backed up by a 45,000 size capacitor regen pool, which is the same amazing capacitor you get in the Constellation, 600i, and Hercules series of ships. This, alongside the high capacitor recharge rate, means that you have a deep ammo magazine and huge DPS with energy weapons. But more than just pure damage numbers, what these weapon hardpoints offer you is flexibility. Thanks to the incredible damage capabilities of size 5 weapons, you can afford to fit some distortion damage on the smaller size 4 hardpoints if you want without taking too much of a hit to your effective damage. A decent analogy would be if you were a soldier that had to destroy a tank with 4 handheld missile launchers and 2 pistols. You can change those pistols to laser pointers to make the missile launchers more effective, rather than adding a negligible amount of damage. Also, because the Corsair has 6 large hardpoints and can fit the semi-ballistic efficient 85B Gatlings, this enables a fully ballistic fit to be viable since each gun can do a solid amount of damage before running out. And thanks to the ability to gimbal all the hardpoints, you can run a fully matched repeater loadout. This is because any size 5 or larger weapon has the slower 700 meters per second projectile speed of cannons, even size 5 repeaters. But by gimbaling the size 5s down to size 4s, you can run a full repeater loadout with all guns shooting at the faster 1400 meters per second projectile speed. If you also consider that there are 4 size 4 missile racks that let you run your own choice of size 1 through size 4 missiles, you have incredible flexibility to set up the ship in the way that you want for aggressive exploration. To help keep you alive while exploring uncharted cargo holds, the ship has a size 3 shield and a reasonable overall hull HP. Don't be fooled by that 90k total hull HP number that you see, because that includes various parts of the ship that don't need to take damage before you explode. Only the 15k nose and body segments need to go to 0 for your Corsair to blow up, and these seem to be large parts of the ship as I frequently have them go red if I screw up and let the enemy explore through my shields. Also, you're a big target with those gigantic wings extending in 3 different directions, and you're pretty darn slow as well, so evading incoming fire is off the table. Exploration will go both ways, so it'll be a battle of attrition. Because of this, the ship takes a bit of practice in knowing when you can win versus when you need to disengage. If you wait until one of your shield bases goes down, there's a good chance you'll blow up before getting away to recharge your shields. so you need to be able to gauge well ahead of your shields dropping if you need to start running. This is something that comes with a bit of practice, and I've definitely blown up my share of Corsairs while figuring it out, but we'll get into that more when we talk about specific loadouts. I want to talk a bit about the handling of the ship, since it's a common criticism. The ship is incredibly slow, especially in atmosphere. On paper, its statistics are a bit better than a Constellation, but in practice the ship feels more sluggish, with more inertia to its movements and a bad jerk profile. The Constellation also gets a bigger increase to its angular turn rates when boosting, but the Corsair is pretty manageable if you're used to handling a Connie. You need to use your boost to help you get your nose on the target and land your shots, so unlike many other ships in PvE, you'll actually use your boost consistently in combat. This is especially useful when one of the AI catches one of your big wings and rams you and spins you around. Rather than slowly pitching and rolling back over to your target, you can boost to reacquire them quickly. The Corsair used to have serious issue with its thrusters, where even the slightest amount of damage would cause them to torque imbalance so badly that even the Drake executives were embarrassed. This has been partially fixed in 3.19.1, so you can take occasional ballistic or missile hits and still be okay, but you can also get unlucky and become uncontrollable after a single missile. I've had that happen to me, but I've also taken 5 missile hits and been fine, so your mileage may vary. Keep in mind that ballistics and missiles mostly penetrate shields now, so be wary of that incoming damage even if your shields are up. Let's wrap this up by covering some of the less important exploration functions of the Corsair, as well as some of the quirks the ship has. The ship is well outfitted with individual crew spaces for 4, a galley, a toilet right next to where you're eating, an engineering room, an armory, airlock, exploration and preparation room, and a spacious cargo bay. One issue with this in the current patch is that you can't really move ship components around despite the 72 SCU of cargo, since the general inventory storage of the ship is only 1500k micro SCU, which is actually less than all of the starter ships except the Aurora MR. You do get 4 external storage compartments of 650k micro SCU under each bed, but you can't put ship components there. For those explorers who actually have friends, the ship does have a respectable turret coverage, with the top turret being able to attack anything at any angle above the ship and the side turrets having a conical range of motion, but still being able to fire towards the front of the ship, aiding the pilot. The downside of having friends is that if you have a person take the co-pilot seat behind the pilot to access the top turret, the ship will give that person, and only that person, control of the ship's capacitor, so you'll have to constantly ask that person to change the power around for you, which can be annoying if you're not the micromanagey type. But one explorer's trash is another explorer's treasure, and this might actually sell the idea of piloting a ship together, with the captain barking engineering orders to the co-pilot like we see on so many sci-fi shows. You could even have a canine or feline co-pilot, since Drake was thoughtful enough to put a fully functional MFD on the floor for them right by your side. And the party piece of the Corsair is the elevator also extends to the roof of the ship, so you could even throw a friend up there with a railgun and really live out some sci-fi fantasies. Just make sure not to step off the elevator's grav pad, or else. The last couple nitpicks I have about this ship is that anytime you take off, the wings need to be folded down by pressing the cycle configuration keybind to use the wing-mounted size 4 gun and missile hardpoints. It doesn't tell you what's wrong if you forget to do it, you just need to remember every single time you take off, which is really irritating until you get used to it. Also, the HUD is incredibly bright, and it doesn't dim when you bring up your mobi-glass, so you're just seeing text on top of text in a shamefully unpolished jumble of characters. Since I talked about the pros and the cons simultaneously, I've put up a quick summary here so you can better understand what aspects of the ship you're balancing. Now, let's get into the different loadouts. Fixed ballistic weapons is the loadout that I recommended when I made my 3.19 VHRT tier list video, and I still think it's a great loadout. Even though ballistics were nerfed in 3.18, the 6 large weapon hardpoints plus 4 size 4 missile racks lets you carry enough shield penetrating ballistic damage to take out a bunch of VHRT targets before needing to reload. And the nice thing about this fit is that you'll never encounter the infinite front size 2 shield bug, since ballistics will go through that shield and impact the front hull normally. This means you can fly straight at your enemy and slowly joust them and all of your damage lands, and it's super satisfying. As for what weapons you use, there's some flexibility. Your options for the size 5 hardpoints are either the 80 5B ballistic Gatlings or the Deadbolt 5 ballistic cannons. These have roughly the same DPS on paper, but the 85B ballistic Gatlings have twice the ammo and can fire for 2 minutes before running dry instead of 1 minute like the Deadbolts. But the downsides of the 85Bs are that they have a short spool up time, you need to accurately trace the movement of your target over time to do the full DPS, and that they have larger weapon spray than the cannons, so you'll miss more of your shots from range. The Deadbolts only need to line up the target for a split second to do much larger alpha damage, and they have less weapon spray, so you're more likely to land shots from further out. What this means is that the 85Bs will perform well against larger targets like the Reclaimers and the Valkyries, whereas the Deadbolts will do more actual DPS against the smaller targets like the Wardens and the Hurricanes. Because of this, my preferred loadout is to use a split loadout for the size 5s and go with 2 85Bs and 2 Deadbolts. For the size 4 hardpoints, you'll get 2 additional ballistic weapons in the Revenant ballistic Gatling and the C788 cannon, but neither of these are good choices. The C788 has been greatly nerfed from its former glory, and its explosive damage doesn't really take out components to disable enemy ships like it used to. The Revenant Gatling fires ammo at the faster 1400 meters per second projectile speed, versus the other ballistic weapons we talked about firing at the slower 700 meters per second projectile speed. A faster projectile speed is actually a good thing though, but for some reason SIG decided to balance ballistics that fire fast shots by only giving them 16 seconds of ammo, making them effectively useless against tanky enemies. So we're back to either the 84B Gatling or the Deadbolt 4 cannon. But unlike the size 5 versions of these weapons, the 84B actually does 73% more DPS than the Deadbolt 4, and both size 4 weapons have almost the same ammo, with the Deadbolts having 60 seconds versus the 53 of the 84B. But because of the downsides of a Gatling versus a cannon, you could really use whatever you want. I think the effective DPS would be a bit higher for the 84B if you can land your shots, but remember you have to trace the target over time and there's a short spool up, so I think they are probably roughly equal in actual combat. I prefer the Deadbolts to land more effective damage against the tricky smaller targets, so that's what I use. I like to group up my 80 series Gatlings and my Deadbolts in separate weapon groups since they operate differently. The range difference of the size 4 and size 5 Deadbolts isn't an issue to me, because I wouldn't be shooting ballistics from over 1k out for my enemy since those shots are less likely to hit with the slower 700 meters per second projectile speed, and I don't want to waste ammo. When fighting Reclaimers, I'll only use the 85Bs to save my Deadbolt ammo, since 85Bs last a lot longer and I want to preserve the Deadbolt ammo for the smaller targets. Against all the non-Reclaimer targets, I'll use all my guns and missiles, balancing which systems I use more based on how quickly they're running out, since ideally I want to run out of all my ammo and missiles at the same time to reload everything at once. I haven't mentioned DPS numbers up until now because, as I've hopefully explained, the numbers on paper don't even come close to telling the whole story, especially when you consider that all enemies have between 50 to 60% ballistic damage resistance to their hull, but for the sake of data, this loadout is pumping out over 10,000 DPS with its 6 guns. That all said, if you want to be an American explorer and go for raw muscle with 6 80 series Gatlings, be my guest. It's definitely a fun build to run, just no matter what ballistic build you're running, make sure to press the right Alt key plus H a couple times to increase the number of decoys that you fire at once to at least 3. You don't need to be stingy with them since you'll be reloading pretty often anyway, so you might as well ensure you don't take any hits from a stray missile. Also, keep your capacitor to max shield since that'll give you an extra 25% damage resistance to the shield HP. I also prefer to bias my front shields forward, running 40% front shields and 20% on all the other sides since I've noticed my front shields are the ones that typically go down first. Just make sure to reset them every so often since the shields will slowly overheat if you bias them, and upgrading your coolers won't stop that, so there's no need to waste your money on those. As for whether or not I'd use this loadout against ERTs, I'm a bit torn. You could totally do it, and I have successfully done it with a shield biased forward to 40%, but it's always been pretty close, and since you can't disengage quickly and the enemy is going to have 2 powerful wingmen, things can go south pretty quick. On a decent 10 plus FPS server, the Hammerhead can actually outmaneuver the Corsair under boost, so you can take a lot of damage if you don't win the battle of attrition. When you add the fact that the Hammerhead is a really tanky bullet sponge that sucks up a lot of your ammo, I don't think it's worth the risk of death and dismemberment to do ERTs with this loadout. but if you find it fun, I'd recommend going with the full 80 series Gatling build. Now let's say that you're an environmentally conscious explorer and you don't want to leave shell casings all around the exploration sites. And let's also say that you're an effective pilot of large ships and are pretty good at aiming your exploration systems. Then you may want to use the fixed laser cannon loadout. This fit has an absolutely massive 5.9k DPS while doing 5k DPS to the hull, which puts it in line with the effective DPS of the fixed ballistic fits, and so it absolutely shreds reclaimers. The obvious upside to any energy-based build is that you won't need to stop to reload with this loadout unless you're out of decoys or need to repair damage. The main downside though is that you have to deal with the infinite size 2 front shield bug, so your damage may not be registered against the enemy hull depending on what angle you're hitting the enemy from. To help against this, I sacrificed some hull DPS in my fit, and I've downsized the size 4 wing weapon hardpoints to size 3s with gimbals so that I could fit distortion cannons. The distortion does a little less DPS to the shields than lasers, and it doesn't do any DPS to the enemy hull, but it can shut down enemy components if you land enough shots near the components. The challenge is that if you shoot distortion at the enemy's front shield, it'll also be blocked by the infinite front shield, so you will need to land some shots from the top, bottom, sides, or rear of the enemy so that you can have your damage be registered against the hull. I had to downsize the wing hardpoints because there are no size 4 distortion cannons, only distortion scatterguns, and I didn't want to deal with the 400 meter range of the scatterguns. I still used fixed gimbals, so I'm not actually getting the benefit of the aim assist, but that's just because I don't want to have multiple targeting reticules. That said, I'm still not 100% sure that the distortion is doing enough to justify its inclusion, so you could put size 4 laser cannons on the wings instead. The M6As will give you the most DPS and bring your total up to 6.2k, while giving you a 20% hull damage increase against the distortion-enabled fit. It doesn't matter which size 5 laser cannons you use since they all have the same DPS and range characteristics. I just recommend avoiding the light strike since they have a lower component HP than the Omniskies and the M7As, and that actually matters in combat now. And I'm not saying the distortion doesn't work. I've seen it take down the front shields a few times while I was hitting the hull with distortion damage, but in those situations I was already hitting the hull, so maybe I would have just been better off having full lasers equipped anyway. For now I still prefer the distortion loadout, but you could use either. When your damage is landing and you're lucky enough to get around the enemies, this fixed size 5 cannon loadout feels incredible. But if you get into a situation where your damage didn't get past the infinite front shield bug, and now you're stuck rotating around trying to land damage on them, this build can struggle bus. To minimize the number of times I get into a situation requiring a new monitor, I avoid flying straight at the enemy and instead will fly to the side of them so I get more time on target. To buy a few extra seconds of survivability, I'll fly to the side with the fewest wingmen, bias my shields with 40% to the front, and move the capacitor around mid-combat to make the shields last longer while the guns are depleting their ammo. I'll start combat with the capacitor to full weapons for the extra 20% ammo magazine, and as soon as I've used up the extra 20%, I'll move the capacitor to shields to get an extra 25% shield damage resistance, and also recharge any shield faces that haven't been hit for 5 seconds. And right as my guns are running out of ammo, I'll put the capacitor back to full weapons to fully recharge them and start the cycle over again. I do this because in a slow ship like the Corsair, your engagement matters a lot since you can't effectively disengage or avoid incoming damage, so you have to use what tools you have to tip the scales to your favor in a battle of attrition. You'll be glad you did when you get out of combat with only a tiny bit of shields left. The other bit of engagement advice I have is to use your missiles on trickier targets like Hurricanes and even the Wardens, since they can be harder to line up shots around their infinite front shields. If you get lucky, you might even shut down their shields with the missiles. I prefer cross-section missiles for the most consistent locking and hit rate, so I'd go size 2 Strike Force or Tempest, or even size 3 Arresters and fire from 4 to 6k out. For size 1s, I like the Arrow 1 IR missiles, even though they struggle with locking just because of their incredibly high DPS. You could potentially do ERTs with this loadout. The struggle is that the Hammerhead AI is smart and it'll consistently try to move its weakened shield faces away from you, so it gets challenging to actually land damage on the same spot repeatedly. But since you have 4 size 5 laser cannons, you could outrange the hammerhead and kite it since it has a max range of about 1.6k, and you can be landing shots on it from 2.5k out. If it chases you, you can keep hitting its head until it blows up, but sometimes it'll turn around as its front shields go down, and then you have to go back and try to finish it off via a brawl. Personally, I think it's more consistent to just spam VHRTs back to back rather than exploring hammerheads, but this ship is definitely capable if you like exploring big game. I'm not going to talk too much about a Gimballed cannon loadout because you miss out on the massive DPS jump of the size 5 laser cannons, but you still have to pay the tax of the slower cannon projectile speed, so I think it's outside of the sweet spot when it comes to trading off different things for your fit. But you could do it if you want, and it'll still work. It'll just take longer since it'll struggle against the infinite shield bug, and you're doing about half the DPS of the fixed cannon build when you're actually hitting their hull. If you do want a Gimballed build for the Corsair, I'd recommend going with the Gimballed laser repeater build. Just like the fixed cannon build, you'll have to deal with the infinite size 2 front shield bug, and just like the fixed cannon build, I tried swapping out my wing hardpoints to size 3 distortion weapons to help deal with that issue, to mixed results. With 4 size 4 Gimballed laser repeaters and 2 size 3 Gimballed distortion repeaters, doing about 2800 total DPS to the shields and about 1900 laser DPS to the hull. If you use this fit, I'd recommend putting the distortion weapons on the second weapon group so that you can stop firing them when shooting at the reclaimer hull, since I've never shut down anything on the reclaimer with distortion damage. This lets your laser repeaters recharge faster and helps speed up your reclaimer kills. But since distortion won't do anything unless it actually lands from an angle that lets it get past the infinite size 2 front shields, you may just want to go for a full laser repeater build, and then you end up with over 3100 Gimballed laser repeater DPS, which is 64% more damage to the enemy hulls than the size 3 distortion repeater fit. And since the enemy that's given me the most trouble with repeaters is the reclaimer, I prefer going with a full laser repeater build to make up some of the DPS difference between repeaters and cannons and chew through those tanky enemy hulls faster. All laser repeaters have the same damage stats in 319.1, so you can use whichever ones you want. The CF series Rhinos and Panthers are the cheapest, the NDB-30s are size 3 repeaters that'll shoot a bluish purple laser if you want more color in your life, and the attritions are my personal favorite because Pico says they look and sound the best. And since I'm flying a Drake ship that sounds like I'm giving a cow a spicy enema, I'll take anything I can get to cover that up. The nice thing about this loadout is that it's the least stressful one to run. You don't have to worry much about ammo or lining up the perfect shot. You don't even have to sweat about the smaller enemies like Hurricanes and Wardens thanks to your gimbals and the faster projectile speed of repeaters. You just sit back, do some capacitor management by pushing power to shields when you're emptying your ammo magazines, and then back to weapons to recharge them, and wait for the enemy to blow up. The downside is that you do have lower DPS, so you'll likely want to bias your shields to 40% forward to tank the incoming damage longer. Fights against reclaimers with VHRT class wingmen can get spicy, since they can land some pretty heavy DPS against you with their size 5 cannons, especially on the faster FPS servers. Against reclaimers, I always like to aim at the butt of the ship, since it's all one section. It's pretty large, it's accessible from most angles, and blowing it up causes the entire ship to blow up. So against reclaimers, I'll fix my gimbal so that I can more precisely aim at the back of the ship. But against all the other targets, I just set the gimbals to auto and refresh the RSI store on my other monitor for new Pico merch. I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention exploring beacons, since these are widely considered to be the best way to make money via ship exploration. And it's true, these are actually great for the Corsair since they remove the long, slow flight from the quantum marker to the target and get you right into the action. If you add in the fact that you have a ton of high-range DPS with the laser cannon loadout, you can even kite dangerous enemies and take on high-threat beacons to make big bucks. The main issue with this is that you actually need to get beacons, and it seems only a subset of people are the chosen ones that can get them. I very rarely see them offered to me, and when they are, they're always on the other side of the system. And I play this game a lot, so I hardly expect the more casual folks to get a chance at them. Hopefully they continue to tweak the spawn rates of those missions as the backend systems behind them mature, but for now, this is a white whale to me. And that's all I've got for the Corsair, folks. It's an interesting ship for sure, and even though there's things about it I don't like, I still find myself coming back to it thanks to its variety of viable exploration loadouts. Continual balance tweaking aside, I think SIG did a great job with the design of this ship. If you've got any questions or comments, please let me know. You can find me in the comments or on Twitch. I've also got a Discord, so come by and say hi. I'll put a link in the description. And as always, thanks for watching, folks. I hope you liked this video. Cheers.